Hey, Francesco, how are you?
Hi, I'm all right. How are you?
Good, man. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. First off, how are you today?
Good, man. I'm doing great. I actually had my let's see, I had a rehearsal for my only gig this month.
Really?
Yeah. So so life is good.
Okay.
Yeah. I got to
Awesome.
play and play with some people for a few moments today. So it was good.
Awesome. Is the Duquesne Jazz Ensemble still rehearsing?
We actually finished up our classes the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And so, what they decided to do, normally what happens is we have the entire week of Thanksgiving off, then we come back for a week and a half of classes and then finals. But what they did this year is we worked through Monday and Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and everybody went home. And now we had three reading days last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then finals started all online last Thursday. So, yes, we've been out of classes for a while, but we were really lucky. I have a rehearsal space big enough that I was actually able to run full big band rehearsals all semester, which was really great.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was nice.
Cool. Really. All right, cool. Let's get this show on the road.
Yeah,
Okay.
man, great.
So,
Excellent. That's fine.
um, so these are mainly just questions about um maybe kind of theoretical compositional standpoints and
Right.
whatnot, if
Oh, I
that
just
makes
realized
sense.
there you go. My video, I wasn't for some reason my video wasn't working there. There you go.
Okay,
I
there you go.
apologize.
No
Yeah.
problem. No problem. Okay. So I'm just wondering. Usually, I'm much better at arranging than I am actually composing.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, like, when you're composing like a new piece, how long does it take for you to finalize the melody? Like before you even start like arranging it, how long before like all the chords are
Hmm.
figured out, like basic ones and the melody and everything like that?
You know, a lot of it depends on how I always talk about in the arranging process, which is the same as a compositional process. It depends on sort of the echelon of what I'm writing. If I'm writing something that is for the publishing company, for instance, for Doug Beach Music, whenever I'm writing original stuff for Doug Beach,
Mhm.
um, I have to write. I can't go too far off the deep end, especially if I'm writing a mid-level piece of music. So that
Mhm.
usually is a fairly quick situation. Usually within a day, I can get the tune done, and then the arranging process starts. Mainly because I can't go too deep. Okay.
Mhm.
However, if there's something that I'm writing that is for me or for a very high level group or something I really care about that I really want to try to stretch myself a little bit, which I don't get the chance to do as much as I'd like, then the process can be pretty arduous because it's very easy to reach a total standstill. Um, and then it's I have a really great idea, and then I'll work it out, and then it'll literally stop, and I'll go, okay, what do I do next? Because I'm trying not to do AABA or try to do any kind of standard song form. I'm trying to do something a little bit different. And a lot of times, really, that music is typically the music I compose for big band. In other words, the compositional process actually starts with the big band score. So in other words, instead of writing a song, which is a pretty typical thing, I do that a lot. But if I'm really trying to do something for me or something I really, really care about, I'll actually start and know it and know it's for the big band. I will actually start with the big band score because that allows me a lot more possibilities. Then now it really opens everything up instead of just having the idea of like, okay, here's a melody, here are some chords. Um, I can put a bass line to this. I can put some kicks. Now the orchestration process actually figures into the composition, which makes it much more interesting. So even if it's not a big band, whatever group I'm writing for, again, if it's something that I really want to try to be creative, again, these levels of creativity, like I said, these echelons of creativity, um, then it can take a while, and I'm at a total standstill. And in which case, I always the picture that I give to students whenever they're working things out, even if it's writing a counter melody to an existing arrangement or composition, is that now you start to turn a Rubik's cube in your mind, and you start to go, okay, what can I do? Okay, and one of the first things we might consider is, okay, what would be the antithesis of what I just wrote? If I just wrote something very rhythmic, in this section. Maybe I should write something more flowing in the next section. If I wrote something that was full of tension, maybe I would make it be a little less tense harmonically in the next section. That's one way to go, you know. And then a lot of it is just pure inspiration, you know, and that really comes down to, Francesco, that just comes down to, I've been really lucky. I mean, I have no formal training as a composer. Never had it. And so the only thing I can figure is that all of these years, I mean, I was incredibly lucky from we had a junior high jazz band in the 70s, which was not odd, but it was less typical in those days than it is now. So I've been playing big band music in that large ensemble since I was in seventh grade. And so I think what happened, the only thing I can figure out is that I started to amass these little bits of information that kind of sat somewhere in my brain. And I sort of amassed this whole library. And so I think the only thing I can, from a totally mathematical standpoint, I think what happens is I sort of access all those records, you know, all those files. And my mind starts to go through and say, okay, who did you hear do this? You know, and you try not to copy verbatim, but take the essence of what that person does and did, and then make it your own that fits with the character of what you're writing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool,
Totally.
cool. I had to,
So
like I said, I had to come at it from a different standpoint. Like I said, it's I've the composition thing came in a really, not a weird way for me, but it was, I kind of played around with it a little bit in college. One of my very best friends, a guy who remains one of my very best friends today, is a guy named Eric Richards, and Eric. He's done a lot of really great, amazing stuff. I don't know if you've played his stuff or not, but I mean,
I
Eric
haven't
is,
played it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. So Eric was composing at that same time. Eric is a year younger than me, and so it's almost like, okay, there's a guy who already does this, so I'm not even going to bother trying, you know, because he already had a pretty good grapple of it. So I would play around with a little bit of composition, just a little bit. But it wasn't until I left and got in the army band that I started to do that. And so this, again, to give you a little more of a background on how I got, again, this idea of amassing these bits and pieces. I had, whenever I got into the army band, I was in the ceremonial band. I didn't immediately get into the army blues. That was about a year and a half into my career. In fact, I didn't even know the army had a jazz band at the time. I was there and all of a sudden I'm in the building. I got my job as a classical saxophone player, playing in the ceremonial band, doing funerals and doing parades, which is a pretty typical function down there. And all of a sudden I was walking into the building, and I hear a jazz band. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't know there's a jazz band here, you know. And so it's like, well, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be outside in 33-degree weather playing marches, you know. I want to be out, you know, in the jazz band. So but having said that, though, this job that I had in the ceremonial band was an amazing one. There were days whenever I was off. I mean, there were days that I was, you know, 8 hours constantly marching, you know. So, but what I did on my time off, I had so much free time, I actually started to lift a whole bunch of tunes that I liked. All those songs that I liked from albums that I had whenever I was in college, I started to try to lift them. Now, I don't think I did a great job at it, but what it did do is, again, amassing these bits of composition. I think that's what happened. And so I wrote an entire fake book worth of stuff that I had lifted. I mean, again, it's not good. I'll be honest with you, it's not good. But that process really trained my ear. And so it's again, this idea of amassing all this information, and all of a sudden I just started to learn to organize it, I guess. You know.
So you said when you played jazz in junior high, was that your first like kind of exposure to that, or?
It was, yeah. I just played saxophone as a kid, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, like most kids do. Playing in the jazz band was just something that, you know, I thought there was something cool to do. And then the most unique experience I had that actually introduced me to the music for real, my director was, I think he was a pretty good saxophonist. I really don't recall hearing him all that much. Um, but he actually played, I remember very well, he played Charlie Parker playing Lover Man. And there was something about that, man, that just hit me. And it was like, that's what I want to do, you know. And I was very directed from that point forward, that I knew I wanted to be a musician. And I really like jazz. And I played classical music too. I love playing classical music too. I didn't have a lot of direction. That I come from, I grew up in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, a very small town about an hour southeast of Pittsburgh. And it by the time I was in ninth grade, the teachers there told me, they said, you need to go to Pittsburgh. And my dad couldn't afford to take me to Pittsburgh for lessons, so I sort of floundered on my own and tried to find my way. But I mean, that's the great thing about that music specifically, is that you can really get a lot just from, if you learn how to listen to recordings and take from what you need. You don't necessarily need a formalized teacher. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I sort of floundered and found my way in through high school,
Yeah.
So
I find myself the same way. I played. I really started jazz band in 8th grade and everything, and it wasn't until my junior year. I was in jazz band until then, until I started. Hey, why not try this for myself and everything like that? And from that
yeah,
point, like again, I listened to your charts. I listened to Eric Richards and
yeah,
a lot of Pyramid of Note stuff.
yeah, sure,
Yeah, and
absolutely, yeah.
what really told me, yeah, I want to write this stuff, was my first big band concert, and it was South Philly Big Band. The opening chart was just like, whoa, it was crazy. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. All right. Sometimes I find myself. Well, hold on. I want to see that. I want to see if this is too similar to the other question.
That's right. That's cool. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I find myself in a rut when arranging. Sometimes I come to a point where I go through like different options in my head, like say for 8 measures, and just everything I try, everything I hum in my head, I put it down. I'm like, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. So I was wondering if this happens to you, and if so, what can you do to get out of it?
Oh yeah. Well, so if you can manage to put a band-aid on it, in other words, by working through it and analyzing why you don't like it, then you can kind of, like I said, you can put a band-aid on it and back up as far as you need to. Maybe you need to back up, maybe it's of the 8 bars you've written, maybe only 2 of those are really relevant, and maybe the 6 need to be altered in some way. So that ability to analyze what you've done and say, okay, going beyond. And again, I'm with you, Francesco. I've done this 1,000 times, more than that, where I've said, okay, I don't like this. But the next question is, why don't I like it? And so when you can figure that out, then you can start to figure out whether or not you can fix what you have, or whether you need to just say, let's put this aside and save it for another day, as far as the idea. So it's not to say the idea might not be valid. I always tell my students, it's like, if you're not, I mean, in the old pencil and paper days, I used to have a whole file folder full of, ripped off pieces of manuscript paper with ideas on them, and I actually, believe it or not, I there are a couple of those ideas that 10 years after the fact ended up getting used. I just happen to remember they were in a folder. But now, of course, with things being digital like they are, the idea of retaining, whether you feel comfortable on a notation program, or whether it's in Logic or something like that, but keeping these ideas, don't ever throw an idea away, because you may, even just a piece of it may be a usable thing. I have right now, oh man, I have bunches and bunches of finale files that are 8 measures of a bass line, or 8 measures of a little concept, which I have no idea where it'll go, but it's there. It's there. So having said that, though, okay, so going back to the situation at hand, okay, so we're working on this idea, and it's like, okay, so if I figured out why I don't like it, and the next thing is how to remedy that, okay. Beyond that, if you start playing with it too much, then maybe, again, maybe it's an idea of just saying, okay, I think we'll just put this away and try to go a whole different way. Now that's difficult, because now what you've done is, to this point, what you've done is you've just linked that piece that you wrote that you don't like. That is now linked pretty indelibly in your mind to what you've written prior to that you like. Somehow cutting that off in your mind and saying, okay, I'm not going to use this now, but where might it go? That's not an easy task, man. That's not an easy thing to do, because, like I said, if you're like me, the idea of the progression from one section of the music to another is, I mean, it's inherent to the music. That's what it does. That's the flow. So all of a sudden, we're just going to chop that off and say, okay, no, I'm going to go in a different direction now. That's not an easy thing to do. So once again, I think it comes down to, at that point, from a visceral, the visceral standpoint would be, what can I do differently then? If it's a larger scale thing, if it's not a matter of changing a few notes, maybe it's a matter of changing the concept of what's there. A less visceral way and a more practical way is that, okay, so everything that we write sounds like somebody. Okay, none of us is original. That's almost impossible. Okay. um so maybe if my inspiration has been drawn from Thad Jones. Let's say I'm writing a song and I've really been thinking about Thad. Well, maybe I should go and listen to a whole bunch of Thad music and see what else I can kind of steal from that, and that will lead me in a different direction. Or, or the more modern is such a bad term to use these days, because everything was modern once, right? But so I'm still a big fan. I mean, I will never ever get my fill of Jim McNeely's music. I am just, if you've not listened to Jim McNeely's compositions, you need to do so, Francesco. It will change your mind, it change your life, because he is so incredibly creative. And have you ever heard of his stuff, Jim stuff?
I have not actually.
Oh man, okay, great. Okay, that's cool. Well, then that's a great journey for you to be on, man. So his a quick history for Jim McNeely. Okay, so Jim was a member of the Thad Jones band well, he
Sorry,
probably was a member whenever Thad was in charge, but
one sec.
he ended up playing piano whenever Mel was.
Sorry, 1 second.
Was that?
Popping?
That's right.
I know. I mean,
Oh
do you hear?
really? Oh shoot. I don't hear it on my end. Let
Okay.
me see. You know what I might have to do? Let me do this. I've had this happen before. Let me change mics and change it. I don't not change mics. I'm just going to change the settings for a second and fix it. Let's see
Okay.
if it fixed. Okay, how about now? Is the popping gone,
No, it's still
or is it
there.
still there?
Yeah.
Shoot. Oh, that's a drag. Well, I'm sure the sound quality won't be as good. I'll switch to the webcam mic. I'm using a focus, but I have a nice mic here too. That's really weird, man. Let's. This is the webcam microphone. Is this any good?
Yeah.
Is it better, or is it still popping?
There's no popping now.
Okay, well, let's keep with that. Okay, good. All right, we can stick with that then, if that's cool. Sorry about that. But anyway, so McNeely, Jim was a piano player, is a piano player, and he played. My first experience was him as a piano player with the Mel Lewis band, which is right after Thad left, so it became the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. And then Jim actually became, a few years down the line, became the musical director and started to compose for that band. And he played piano for Phil Woods. And now, you can hear his stuff everywhere. If you go to a lot of the European big bands have played his music, and he's incredibly creative. In fact, if I would recommend one album to buy to really get you into McNeely, which is very helpful to you as a composer,
Mhm.
is the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra's album Lickety Split. Jim wrote the entire album, and every track but one is an original composition. And the cool thing about it, and so speaking of this too, so if you can pick up a physical copy of the CD, because unless this is online like this, but what they did is the booklet that comes with the CD is Jim talking about what he did, and he talks about some of the concepts he used whenever he composed, and it's absolutely fascinating to get an inside look on one of the very creative souls and how he approached the music. One of his real cool things in this tune Lickety Split, which is a very cool cool piece of music, the title track, is he talks about, it's called the what if proposition. So he talks whenever he writes and teaches his students to write, he comes up with a what if proposition. And all of a sudden it's just what if, and the what if can be whatever you want it to be. So Lickety Split is an atonal funk tune. Okay. And so his what if proposition is, what if Schoenberg and James Brown co-wrote a composition? So that's it, right? Exactly, right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the what ifs are, and again, it's the what if is nothing in particular. It's just the idea, what if, so what if I took Lullaby of Birdland and did it in 7? That's a what if. It can be, something relatively simple like that, or something really complex, a much more obtuse concept,
but it's really great. You should definitely check that album out first, because you can actually read about Jim talking about his process. The other thing to do too is from a book standpoint. Boy, I can't remember the name of the book either. There is a book that a guy named Rick Lawn did. I think Rick did. I think I'm right. But there's a book that a lot of us used, and I still tell students to reference it. It's called Inside the Score. The original book is called Inside the Score, by a guy named Rayburn Wright. Rayburn Wright was at Eastman for years and years and years. And the cool thing is he took 3 of Sammy Nestico's charts, 3 of Thad Jones' charts, and 3 of Bob Brookmeyer's charts from that time period, from the 70s. And he tore them apart, note by note, literally note by note. And so you get this really in-depth analysis of 9 pieces of music from 3 different writers. And anyway, Rick Lawn did an updated version of that with guys like Jim McNeely, Bob Mintzer, Vince Mendoza, James Darcy Argue, or Darcy James Argue, sorry, I went the wrong way with his name, and Maria Schneider. So some of the really creative souls who are out there writing these days, and it's a very interesting book. So those are good ways to get you kind of into the large scale side of the composition thing, So
that book was called again?
Unfortunately, I'm gonna wait. Let me see. Actually, see if I can look it up. Wait a second, because if you're gonna actually put this out, we should have real information here. Okay, let's see. Oh, come on, there we go. Let's see. It's probably Richard, not Rick. Let's see. See if this comes up. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay, good. So it's called Jazz Scores and Analysis, Volume 1. And it's put out by Shure Music, SAGR. They're the guys who have done those new real books. That's the company that does all those great new real books that we've had for years now. Mm-hmm. But it's the same idea, where he took these compositions and tore them apart bit by bit. So it really gives you some very deep insight into what these people were thinking whenever they wrote.
So. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. All right. It's no secret that in more contemporary compositions, especially big band charts, tend to be very complicated. Yes. And some examples, the works of Alan Baylock and Mike Crotty, Dave Liebman, and everything. They involve really dissonant harmonies, frequent rhythmic syncopation, changing meters, just some examples. Right. Incredibly impressive and sound amazing when done well. But some people may find themselves kind of lost in that because of how really out there it is. Do you think that is their goal for people to get kind of lost in the music, kind of like this, I don't know, experience sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the music. In general, the music that we think of as jazz these days is much more complicated than it used to be ever. That the idea of multiple mixed meters are, that's not unusual, and the idea of extended harmonies, and not extended is wrong. That's not really a correct term. The idea of more dissonance is not what I like. I don't like that either. Non-functional harmony that moves in a different way, than we were used to. The music has gotten more dissonant and more extended as we've gone on. And I think that's, and again, if we're to strive to be the most creative we possibly can, that would be where we would go. We would try to take the listener on a journey, a very intense journey. Dave Liebman is a great example of that. I forget if you mentioned Dave or not, but Dave is and again, he's one of those old souls who is still at the forefront of the music as far as creativity and writing very creative music. But yeah, I think it's not unlike the classical realm, that this idea of jazz and classical music kind of being here, and they've been kind of gradually making their way, and now they're firmly ensconced in one another now, and so there are quote unquote classical elements in jazz, and there are jazz elements in classical music too. It's undeniable now, even more so than it used to be. It used to be kind of a funny thing trying to combine those two, but now the composers in both idioms have the chops to exist in each other's idioms and combine them very well. You know, if you listen to, I mean, John Adams, if you listen to the classical composers like John Adams and people like that, and you hear these elements in there. And it's really kind of cool because it's very appealing to us jazz folks who are trying to search for, more interesting music, and so you can get, and so that's not just listening to the jazz writers, but listening to some of the classical writers and getting some things from them is pretty, go back to Bernstein. Bernstein is still incredible. I mean, that's years and years and years ago, so.
Cool. Okay. Is that the right way? Yeah. Okay. From when you've like your first ever compositions to like where you are now, how do you think you've evolved and changed?
I'm faster now.
Yeah.
No, I tell the story whenever I first started to compose. And it was a big band thing. This is before we had notation programs. I remember very distinctly. I tell this story way too many times to all my students of it taking me 8 hours to write 8 measures of music. I remember very well. It was something I was doing multiple lines converging on each other, and this is before again being a non-composer trying to compose, or an untrained composer trying to compose, I should say it like that. I had a heck of a time realizing that the moving music will occasionally have moments of dissonance, but they're so momentary that it doesn't matter. In other words, the 2 lines are crossing, all of a sudden they're banging up against each other for a couple notes. It's okay because they're going to leave that. And so I didn't have that luxury of being able to hear that. I had to imagine that. So this 8 bars I'm referring to, I was literally taking a snapshot of every single half beat in each measure, saying, okay, here's what these lines are doing right here. And it's like, oh, wait, there's a dissonance here. I should try to fix this. And then of course, computer notation came along, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, I don't have to worry about this now, because now I hear that it's fine, And so that's certainly one example of how it used to be. Now, how I've gotten better, I think I've gotten more adept at handling the ways I want harmony to go. I think I've gotten more adept at the songs that I write, most of which you haven't heard. The published stuff you've heard is much more inside. I mean, that's what the publishing companies want. I mean, I don't get to be uber creative, only on very few occasions, but on those occasions I do, I know what the vocabulary is, So that's what I think. That's how I've improved. I've really been a good student of the music, and I've tried to. So whenever I go to write something, I decide it's going to be something that is in this vein. I know what chords are usable and what chords are not usable. I know what rhythms I should do. I know what kind of grooves I should do, where I didn't at first. I would do some silly things because I didn't understand that this groove doesn't work with this kind of music, or this harmony does not belong in this kind of music. I find this in my students a lot. I have some really great students who will do reharmonizations or will compose, and they'll come up with like 4 or 5 really great bars. And all of a sudden, like 2 bars have some really funny, dumb little chords in them. And so, my job is to point that out and say, okay, now understand that these 2 or 3 chords you have here don't fit. You need to find something that fits that's in the same density and the same manner of dissonance as what you've done, So, and I think for me, another help has been teaching, from this non-composer standpoint, teaching composition from this non-composer standpoint. Because again, teaching people in the way that I learned, I think, is a much more organic way than opening up a textbook and saying, okay, we're going to study 18th century counterpoint now. Mm-hmm. It's helpful, I guess. I never studied it, but I think the idea of being able to help students has made me a better writer too. Because again, if we go back to what I talked about a few minutes ago with you, is not just saying that I don't like what I've just written, but saying, why don't I like what I've just written? And so that's my job whenever I'm working with my students, and all of us, any of us who teach composition. It's like, okay, so it's not just enough to say, okay, I don't like this. Why don't I like this? And how can I help you fix this? What would you do? So because of that, I become a better writer, and just having more opportunities too. I mean, there's an interesting, the idea of, you know, like I said, the majority of what I write that people know of is very mainstream. That's what the publishing company, especially Hal Leonard, that I do all the arrangements that I do for them. That's what they want. They need to sell music, you know. And so knowing how far I can go and still have it be acceptable is also, I think that's a, I don't want to say admirable. That's not necessarily the way to say it, but I think it's a good thing to be able to know how far you can take it without going off the deep end. But whenever I can go off the deep end, which is mostly for me, on those few occasions I get to write something for somebody, that I get actually hired to write something for someone that wants me to go, you know, wants me to really go get very extended, I really enjoy it. And I can go there. But the idea of being able to write, you know, again, not only stylistically, but being able to say, okay, I know that a high school band is going to play this. I can't go too far. I just had this happen actually before all the craziness hit. I was hired. I did Florida's All-State, and they have a really wonderful state program. The musicians are top notch. The student musicians are top notch there. And so they always, the all-state director, they usually hire the all-state director to write a piece of music. So, but even though I got to write for some of the, well, for the best kids in the state and some really stellar ones, they asked me not to write an incredibly difficult piece of music so that most of the bands in Florida, or a lot of the bands in Florida, high school bands, could play it. And so it was interesting to be able to write something that was interesting for those students to play, but that was playable by maybe some lesser bands. In other words, if these students went back to their own school bands, they could still play this piece of music. So, so being able to write like that, you know, and again, I just like being all over the map, to be honest with you. I mean, I really enjoy being able to, you know, having, okay, I have to write something for a 7th grade band, although I don't do that too much anymore, you know, but then being able to write for, you know, for a professional band, like I get to do every once in a while. So.
Cool. All right. You also write for Little Big Band format. I've always been kind of intrigued by this. There's something I can't really explain it, but it's something I really like about it. Something that's like it's kind of cool how it's more, I don't know, it's kind of like a chamber jazz ensemble.
Mhm.
And so, and I've tried like different things as things I find like, oh, I think this will fit right here. But I find myself like, something tells me I got to think a little differently with this. Do you find yourself in that?
Absolutely. So this is, so the Little Big Band is my favorite group to write for. I've had the opportunity to go beyond, once again, going past the published stuff. We actually had a functional 10-tet for a while, and it was just amazing fun to write for that. I enjoyed that more than the big band. I've done enough big band stuff now that, again, there are still things to discover in the big band, but I mean, I don't know that there's too much more that we can do. Okay. Just because it's been done. But if we go back to the Little Big Band, it's like, so you're exactly right. It is a chamber ensemble, but it also has the power of a big band if you know how to write for it. And so that's one of the beauties of it. And also the fact that you have, you know, 8 less musicians than you do in a typical big band. You now sort of have thinned out the herd now, and you have 10 people who are really great players, most of whom can solo. And so now it becomes this interesting amalgam of a small group and a big band. And you can actually control it in both ways as the arranger. The one of the parts that I really like about it is the puzzle aspect of it. Okay, so how can I make this sound like a saxophone solely if I only have 3 saxes? How can I make this sound like a big shout chorus with a lead trumpet up, you know, on top of the staff? And how do I spread those notes out so that it doesn't sound too thin, that it actually has that same kind of depth, you know? So it's the puzzle part of that, which I'm sure, going back to my own formation as a writer, I remember very well being intrigued whenever I was a freshman in college. I played baritone sax in the Duquesne Jazz Ensemble. I actually graduated from Duquesne University, where I teach here. And as a baritone player, sitting on the very edge of the band, playing at the bottom, I was intrigued by the puzzle aspect of the music, how the trumpet parts fit with the saxophone parts and the trombone parts, and how everything kind of turned into this very interlocking puzzle. And so now that same puzzle is presented to us with only 6 horns or 7 horns, depending on what you do, which configuration you write for. And now trying to combine those, okay, what kind of timbres can we get out of that now? Because one of the nice things about not having a full section is that now we are combining some interesting timbres and getting some different sounds out of it. So, but yeah, I enjoy writing for the Little Big Band immensely. I miss it. It's been a few years since we've had a functioning Little Big Band here, but I really enjoy writing for that group immensely.
Awesome. Still going off Little Big Band stuff. I noticed like maybe here we go back to like early charts and later charts, but like some of the earlier Little Big Band arrangements, I feel like are treated more like a traditional big bands. Maybe there's like designated soloists and interludes between them and a straight up shout chorus and everything.
Right.
And in the later ones, it's like all open. Is there anything that kind of like made you think, like, change your mind about that?
Well, and again, a lot of this has to do with what the assignments are as far as like the publishing company. The publishing company is all tunes, so that's still that tradition is still there, because again, that's what the publishing company wants. The stuff that I get to write for me can be a little more exploratory. But I still like going back to tunes, to be honest with you. There's still I still like, even though I love composing, I just as much love arranging someone else's music, because there seems to be more of a devil may care attitude taking someone else's music and playing around with it. But whenever I've composed my own music, we tend to treat that stuff so sacred sometimes that it's difficult to mess with your own piece of music. In other words, I've taken the time to create this song, and now I go to arrange it, and I'm afraid to re-rhythm or I don't know, add a 7/4 bar here or something like that. Whereas if I took, I don't know, some American popular song and said, okay, I'm just going to totally mess with this right now, and I'm just going to tear it apart and reconstruct it. So there's a beauty of that. And the other thing about that too is there's a reference point. And so it's not just the original composition that is interesting, but now we have a reference point. In other words, like one of the great examples, a big band example I can give you is Ed Neumeister, a trombone player who actually plays with, I don't think he does anymore, but he played with the Vanguard Orchestra, and I think he's over in Europe. Wrote this amazing chart on A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, and it's really segmented, and it's really, really beautiful. And again, the reason that we enjoy that arrangement is because we have the reference point of what the original sounds like. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of being an arranger is not necessarily a lesser position than the person who composes for a big band. And not that you're saying that, I'm not saying you're saying that, but this is part of the beauty of this. This is one of the reasons I still like to arrange just as much as compose. So, and the reason I say that is because I really do more arranging than composing for the Little Big Band, just because there's so many tunes that I want to play with that I really love. That would be that I'll just all of a sudden, there's nothing. No one has really ever given me an assignment with my own group that I've written for, the Little Big Band I've written for, and so it's just me kind of paging through and saying, "Oh, this is a great tune. I think I'll write a chart on this." Because it's one I've always wanted to do. I really like this tune. Let me see what I can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, awesome. Okay. This one has some backstory to it. So, okay. Criterion's Jazz Ensemble, our director, Jonathan Raganese, he's very much like, take the music, explore as many possibilities as there could be. It's not like too egregious with it to the point where it completely changes the chart. That's not how it goes.
Right.
But it's just, it's all about possibilities and exploring how different ways to play it. And naturally, our lead trombone player, he's student teaching now, and he told we had a meeting, and he told the story of how he kind of translated it to the high school jazz ensemble, where he's just like, I don't know, just trying different things. And the band director said, "You're giving him too many possibilities to think about. Just stick to the chart." And So I'm just wondering, like, do you think that maybe it can be necessary for maybe like younger ensembles for charts to have less restrictions, like less information in them? So like maybe in the solo section, just for them to explore more possibilities at a younger age?
Yeah, I think it's very good. Again, this is we're into a touchy subject, as in if we had a lot of great high school jazz directors out there um, who understand the music, then it would be really easy to have this happen. And again, what this situation you're describing is a utopian one, you know, and there are groups out there that are like that, even at the younger levels. But so many directors have not had adequate training in the idiom, and so they're afraid to go off the page, you know. But this is admirable. I mean, the idea of the sooner you get off the page and understand the idea of being creative is, man, that's so incredibly important. Again, too many band directors come from their concert, not concert band, that's terrible. Excuse me. There are people who have not had adequate jazz training, and so they're afraid. They're not quite sure what to do. And so this is where you are, like your student teacher friend, where it is too many. There are too many possibilities out there. And again, if the kids haven't been brought up in this environment, then it's difficult. Now, having said that, if your student teacher friend had the time and the actual director was open enough to let that student teacher play around with the music a little bit and get the students attuned to the idea, I think they would find it incredibly satisfying. Now, the difficulty here, and again, this is just being honest, is that once that student teacher leaves, will the director continue in that same vein? You know, and so that's where we lose it. That's a shame, because there are lots of great student teachers who are coming out, like obviously in your program, who really have a lot of the ball and have had really great experiences, and try to um, invest that kind of exploratory nature into a jazz band, a high school jazz band that they're student teaching. But it's scary to a lot of the directors, because that's just a totally foreign world to them. They're on the page, you know. That's the classical realm, for the most part, is still an on the page realm, you know. And the idea of going off is a scary thing, you know, for them. So it's interesting. But I think, you know, I think given, you know, if we had this utopian situation, then I would say, yeah, that it would be great if jazz bands at an early age, at the junior high level, would start kind of playing around with open solos and cueing backgrounds whenever it seemed right, you know, and not worrying about, okay, here's a 120 measure piece of music. We're going to play 120 measures. And we're going to play it exactly as it's written, you know. So.
Okay. I feel my soloing in a big band setting is much different than it is in a combo. And with this, I think it's because like when big bands, you know, there's backgrounds in the horns, there's just a straight up larger sound and more specificity in colors and textures and everything like that. So
Yeah.
I'll tend to plan out my solo a little more just to see like what fits. And yeah, it's like, I want this here at the solo break, and this will sound good with the backgrounds. And a lot of times, yeah, it really works and everything like that. But do you think that sort of sacrifices true musical expression and like, because it's definitely more calculated than it is like letting the music speak for itself.
Yeah, you're on the money. I've said this many times. I love to solo in a small group. I really, in most cases, I don't like to solo that much in a big band, especially on my own charts, because, and then I'll go backward after I say this. Like on my own charts, to solo my own charts is very difficult, because even though I'm trying to create, I'm also trying to listen to what's happening here and behind me in the band, and if they're playing things correctly, especially whenever I go out to do things with a band I've never met before. Are they pulling off all the backgrounds that I wrote? Are they playing this well? And I get distracted. I get very easily distracted. Now, if it's not mine, but you're exactly right. It can be very hindering to play a solo in a big band because of these backgrounds. These backgrounds, in other words, you have to be careful. There's so many things to take into consideration. In a small group, the music happens as it does and it progresses. However, in the big band, if when you're in that small group setting, whenever you started your solo and the backgrounds will eventually come in, if you've actually worked the intensity up beyond where the backgrounds are going to come in from an intensity standpoint, you can't back down. That's very odd. So it's almost like you need to kind of need to turn the temperature up just enough so that whenever the backgrounds finally come in, that you're at that same intensity level where they are, you know. And then, like you said, we start to find those pieces where we're going to get swallowed by the backgrounds. And so do we just lay out, or do we play something that we play like a long note over that, so that we're not messing around with the backgrounds or conflicting with the backgrounds. And we're forced, usually because of the way the climax points always work, we're definitely forced into, at some point, moving ourselves up to that highest intensity point along with the backgrounds. And maybe we didn't want to do that, but it can be a bit of a challenge, you know. And so those folks who solo really well with a big band, you know that they've really given a lot of thought to what they can and can't do. Now, to Francesco, you said it about playing sort of the same things. We can take that all the way back to Duke's band. You know, I mean, a lot of people are aware of this, and maybe some aren't, is that the guys in Duke's band, once Duke recorded a piece of music, a lot of times Duke wanted his guys to play their solos almost verbatim from the recording, because they worked so well, you know. And he, and being the composer that he was, I think he really was paying attention to what the soloist did around the backgrounds, and that really worked well. So let's not mess with it, you know. So there is, and again, I think you would find, even with the most creative players, I think you would find, and I'll give a great example again, one of my heroes, Bob Mintzer. Okay, Bob, I was just listening tonight. You know, Bob is directing the WDR big band right now, the German big band, and they were doing this very straight ahead thing that Bob had just written, and Bob soloed on it, and I know without even having to ask him, I'm positive he's absolutely aware of what he wrote background wise, and is tailoring his playing at that moment to what he's written, you know. So again, so we can be creative when we're in that section. And again, if you think about we take it back to Thad and Mel, because again, Thad and Mel's band is one of the early bands that actually allowed the soloists to kind of do their thing, and then the backgrounds came in and just enhanced what was going on. Where the players, when you think about like Cecil Bridgewater or guys like that playing these really intense solos, or like, oh man, just the one live recording I was just looking at with Joe Henderson playing on Second Race. Joe Henderson plays this just, oh my God, he plays like chorus after chorus after chorus. It's so intense, you know. And then the backgrounds come in, and I'm sure Joe had to have had a little bit of consideration of what was happening in the backgrounds whenever he was playing. So, but up until that point, you're kind of free to do what you want.
Cool. All right. This is more personal, but say like I'm more experimenting with dissonance in like shout sections and stuff like this. There is an arrangement I'm working on of epistrophe.
Yeah.
And so naturally, Thelonious Monk. There's going to be like some
there you go.
Yeah, pretty like wild sounds in there.
Right.
So, I'm doing the shout section, and I have a good idea of what I want, and like it just I can't help but feel like, yeah, it's dissonant, and no one's really gonna pay attention to like the notes in between them, because it's just gonna like it's yeah. So like but are there certain notes to like really emphasize, if that makes any sense? I mean,
so whatever. So I think I know what you're getting at. So the idea of intentionally putting dissonances into you, so especially the tune you're dealing with. I mean, just generally dealing with Monk's music is, you know, aside from the ballads, which are just absolutely beautiful, the dissonance that's inherent in Monk's music really gives you carte blanche to go off and do things that vertically aren't sound from a functional standpoint, right? But finding those notes is really a matter of exploration. I mean, I can't say that I would. I mean, I guess if we started to talk about specific chords, we would say it's like, okay, yeah, here's a great note you can throw in. But I mean, it really comes down to experimenting with that sound, you know, this note, and listening to the piano, or listening to the playback of the notation program, and saying, okay, do I like this intentional dissonance I've put in here, or this note that doesn't quite fit? Actually, a good example of that is, which is really interesting. Again, going back to the original Inside the Scorebook by Rayburn Wright, whenever he analyzes Bob Brookmeyer's music, there are these really interesting things whenever you start to look at Bob's chords during that time of his life. Like I said, this was the 70s that these charts come from. And there are moments where you'll see, and it's actually written in the chord voicings too, where there will be, you know, it'll be like a, you know, D major 9, and then it will say add E flat. You know, I mean, that's a random example. I don't even know if that exists. However, the deal is, what he would do is he would have one person playing that E flat, and so you'd have this very inside chord, with the exception of something in the middle of that chord, and you put it right in the middle of voicing, and so there's your ears going like, okay, something is really interesting here. I'm not sure what it is, but it doesn't fit, but I like it. You know, and Bob was amazing doing that kind of thing, man. If you look, like I said, you'll see all these analyses that Rayburn Wright did, and you see these added tones. The one, you know, I had my own sort of dumb experience on this. In fact, finding one of those, I had done. I do these concerts with my students where we'll do a themed concert, and I usually write all the music for it. So I've done like movie themed concerts where I've actually, you know, gotten some pretty heavy movie themes and written arrangements. I did, and the one I'm referring to now is I did a TV themes concert, and I went back to Lalo Schifrin and the themes he wrote. Of course, he wrote the theme for Mission Impossible, which almost everybody knows. And so I got to that, and I try not to rely on too much published music whenever I do that stuff for reference, unless I'm really stuck. But I got to the last chord of that chart, and I had figured out what the chord was. You know, and I had orchestrated it, and it's like, okay, that's good. And I kept listening to the chord, and I said, there's one more note there. I can't figure out what it is. And I had to listen really, really hard. And it was one of those single person playing a note that does not fit the chord whatsoever. And it was just enough for you to go like, wow, that's interesting. So this to kind of finally go back around to what you're saying. Yeah. So you're in the middle of writing this shout chorus. Yeah. It's random, but it's not random. So you have to decide what dissonant note is the most applicable in each of those cases, you know. So it's not necessarily one over another. It's, you know, it's like, okay, let's add an extra note here and see what happens. How does it sound? And again, luckily we can hear that with the notation programs these days. We don't have to just imagine those things.
All right, cool. What was I thinking? Oh yeah. Another thing that the lead trombonist said is he's also an arranger.
Okay.
He says he commonly finds himself like there's something like he always goes back and redoes it and then sends it back and then redoes it when there's another error like brought up. And I found this, I did an arrangement of Dewey Square, Charlie Parker. And went to Criterion's, it's like a first time hearing of the big band, sounded great. Like the thought that I wanted was like executed, and I was like, yes, I really like this. But then there's like little technical things like maybe in like the comping and the piano part, and there's like that he points out. I'm like, crap, well, I'm gonna go back and do that again, send it back. So but then Professor Raganese said the way that you learn the best is not by just going back and just completely fixing it, but rather just, you know, quantity, just continue pumping out these things. Do you agree?
Total agreement. Yeah. It's a good example goes back to the great Phil Woods, the great alto saxophonist Phil Woods. Phil talked about he composed a piece of music every day of his life, and he said most of them did not see the light of day, but it was the idea of composing that was important to him because he was practicing composition. I'll go back. I mean, I hate. Every once in a while I have to go back into my charts, and I just hate doing that because I'll find things. It's like, oh, why did I do that? That's really stupid. And that was just because at that moment, that's what I decided to do. And maybe 3 years down the line, after I've looked at it again, maybe I would think differently, but that was kind of what was in the moment. If there are some really egregious ones, yeah, you should fix those. If they're put it this way, if you're going to play the chart, a couple times a week or something like that, then yeah, you have to fix it for your own well-being. Otherwise, it's going to like gnaw at you, right? But the idea of moving on and saying, okay, I'll make sure I won't do that in this next piece of music. I'll take more care in writing the bass line or this line here and there. Yeah, I've had the ability to go back in and fix something, and I have, but I mean, I don't, same thing. I think it's out there, and I can't, it's just not worth going back time and time and time again to go fix everything, because otherwise now we're starting to obsess over it, and instead of moving forward, like your director said, instead of moving forward and writing something new that gives you new experiences, now you just keep revisiting the same thing.
Yeah. Okay, that was like the last legit question. I just one more thing.
Sure,
like,
Francesca. Yeah, I'm cool, man.
Because this has been, I went through like this whole thing where like I want to go to the National Jazz Workshop and everything, like at Shenandoah Conservatory.
Right, sure.
I never did, but
Okay.
everything like that. But
Right.
I looked through all these videos and stuff, and I found a video of you with like the Little Big Band in 2018. And it was this chart, and I had like I have it up right now, and I'm just wondering if you could just give me the name of this chart, because I could never find it anywhere.
Okay, all right.
Let's see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you see my desktop right now? Or no, wait, hold on.
Not yet. There you go. Now, yeah, now it's good. Now you're sharing. Yeah.
I'll try to. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I could never find this anywhere. Here we go.
Okay, so the student big band. Okay, all right, go. All right, great. Oh yeah, okay, I know. Yeah, so it's a bebop tune called Ray's Idea. Ray Brown, the bassist Ray Brown wrote it. Okay, and it's actually from the Dizzy's Big Band recorded it. Now this is my own arrangement on it, but it's that the tune itself is Ray Brown's tune called Ray's Idea, and actually Gil Fuller is the co-writer of it. Okay, Gilfuller. Gil was in I think he was in Dizzy's Big Band, if I remember right. He's a trombonist. I apologize, I'm getting some of these instruments wrong, but yeah, but that's it. And so this is a tune I was like, and the reason this chart came about was because we have an album with a called the Pittsburgh Jazz Legacy it's a little big band album that we did, and so I did arrangements of Pittsburghers tunes. I have a medley of Henry Mancini's Moon River and Days of Wine and Roses on there. This Ray's Idea is on there. I don't know if you ever heard of an amazing pianist and composer named Mary Lou Williams. We did one of Mary Lou's tunes on there. And so, yeah, so Ray's Idea is that. Now that's an interesting thing too. So talking about other charts. So I actually have two versions of that chart. The first one we used whenever we started to play the tune, but when we decided we were going to record an album, it was not much more than a head chart. And so I said, well, I can't just let a head chart on the album. I have to actually do something to it. So I went back in and rewrote it. Now, a lot of it, I retained a lot of the basic tune, but I added a lot more to it. But yeah, it's called Ray's Idea. It's really great tune. Again, Ray Brown, great Pittsburgh bassist. So yeah, okay, cool. There you go.
Well, thank you very much for this. This meant
yeah, man,
to me.
My pleasure, Francesco. Yeah. This has been enjoyable for me too. I love talking about stuff, man. It's very, very, very cool, man. You ask you some great questions. So,
all right, thank you very much.
Great, man.
Take care now.
All right.